If you're a dApp developer or a developer moving into creating Web3 applications, then you're probably already familiar with smart contracts and the Ethereum API. And you might already be familiar with these libraries here, two popular JavaScript libraries, Ethers.js and Web3.js. Now in this video, what I want to do is explain the differences between the two, Web3 and also Ethers, show you how Moralis uses those and how you can build them into your applications that you're using Moralis with, which one we recommend. But there are limitations with these libraries, so I want to share with you a top tip to help you use a platform to really accelerate the speed of your development and overcome some of these issues with the libraries. With that said, let's jump straight into the content. So let's start with Web3.js. It's an open source JS library that lets you communicate with the Ethereum blockchain via an RPC node. The Web3.js library is written in Node.js and it can be used in a web browser or server side. The library includes a bunch of different modules or snippets of code like functions and methods that you can use in your project. The ETH module is web3.eth and it gives you access to submodules like the contract module or the accounts module for more interaction. The library is more mature than Ethers. It's got a large community behind it, but its popularity is kind of decreasing relative to Ethers as Ethers starts to take over more. The documentation is good, and that will give you access to the modules and the methods in the API reference down the side. To install Web3.js, you can add a script tag to your HTML, or you can use the Node package manager to run npm install web3. You can then instantiate Web3 and interact with the Ethereum network and connect to an Ethereum node. You can add your private key to be able to send transactions. You can get the ether balance of an address using the getBalance method. To interact with a smart contract, you just instantiate a contract object and pass the ABI and the address of the contract as two arguments. With a contract object, you can read values from a specific smart contract, or you can send a transaction, which is used to execute smart contract functions. You can also listen to events, smart contract events, and you've got some formatting values and utilities as well. As a quick summary, Web3.js is well used. Its popularity is slowing. The file size is about 284 kilobytes, and it does include some compiled dependencies, which have given some issues to some users. You get an LGLv3 license, and a link to the documentation is in the description below. Now, Ethers.js. First things first with Ethers is that it's actually under 100 kilobytes, which is around 3 times smaller than the Web3.js library. So it's much, much smaller, and that can help the smaller applications load much faster. It's becoming a lot more popular based on download statistics from NPM and forum interactions. Also, the documentation is great. Ethers is written in TypeScript, which is also becoming more popular and user-friendly. For example, you can use ENS names anywhere Ethereum addresses take place. Now, one of the main differences between Ethers and Web3 is how they handle key management and interaction with the Ethereum blockchain. Ethers separates a wallet that holds keys and signs transactions from the provider that serves as a connection to the Ethereum network, which checks the state, sends transactions, etc. So it basically splits up the way that you interact with the blockchain, whereas Web3 assumes that the node will store the keys, sign transactions, and interact with the Ethereum blockchain. And MetaMask kind of emulates that environment through a browser application. So MetaMask is needed to hold keys and sign transactions and interact with Ethereum mainnet using the Web3.js library. And finally, with Ethers, you get more information in a transaction receipt. Responses for on-chain calls are different. The main difference is that Web3 returned a Promi event where you could subscribe to events for callbacks, and the responses from Ethers don't have this functionality. Instead, you just get more information in the receipt, and you can even wait for confirmations using the response.wait method. With Ethers, you have 4 models. You've got the provider, the contract, the utils, and the wallet. The provider basically just allows you to connect to the Ethereum blockchain, issue queries and sign transactions, and lets the users change the state of the blockchain. Contract is for reading and interacting with and listening to smart contracts, but it's mainly for deploying smart contracts. Utils, useful tools for data formatting. And the wallet connects to any Ethereum address and even allows you to create new wallets and sign transactions. So Ethers is becoming more popular than Web3.js. You get an MIT license. It's a smaller library size for faster loading applications, and the documentation for Ethers is also in the description below. So how does Moralis fit in with Web3 and Ethers? Well, the Moralis platform provides you with a fully functional Web3 provider. Up to now, the Moralis platform has been using Web3.js as the standard library, but after listening to the community, listening to what developers have requested, we've made the switch to Ethers.js. So that means now whenever you call the enable Web3 method or authenticate, then Moralis Web3 will be an instance of Ethers.js instead of Web3.js. We'll still support Web3.js, but the default is Ethers. Now, what that means is any builds that were relying on some of the Web3 functionality will now be affected, and there'll have to be some changes. And there's a link in the description to one of the forum posts that helps talk you through that. I'll come on to that in a moment. For example, the responses of on-chain functionalities are different. Typically affects things like the Moralis.transfer and Moralis.execute function methods. But don't panic, we've got some solutions to help you with that. Here's one of the forum posts that I would recommend to take a look at if you're looking to fix some of the issues that this might have in your application. If you scroll down to breaking changes, it repeats a few things we've already mentioned here. That when you use the default Moralis.start and then Moralis.enable Web3, you will get Ethers.js instead. And if you want to use Web3, you just need to install it with either the script tag or an npm command. And then you'll just need to add Web3 library, Web3 inside of those options. As for the changed promises, I talked about the promi event before, and it has an effect on Moralis.transfer, Moralis.execute function, but also some plugins. And if we take a look at the documentation, you'll be able to find more about the Moralis.transfer function underneath sending ETH tokens and NFTs, and you'll be able to find more about executing functions under the Web3 section and execute function. So coming back to the forum post here for custom authentication, previously you could overwrite the enable Web3 function, but it's no longer possible anymore. But you can still implement your own connector. You'll just need to extend the abstract connector. So again, I'll leave the link to that post in the description below. Once again, if you need to install Ethers.js in Moralis, once you run the Moralis.start, you can simply initialize a Web3 instance by using Moralis.enable Web3. If you still want to use Web3.js, it's very, very similar, but you'll just need to add this Web3 library inside of your code. So Moralis does integrate with Ethers.js and does have support for Web3.js, but you need to be aware that there are limitations with using these JavaScript libraries and the Ethereum API. These tools will help you communicate with the Ethereum blockchain. But what if you want your application to be cross-chain? You need to be aware of some of the limitations of these libraries. But sometimes there are situations where you'll need more tools than those provided by these libraries. Sometimes when you're building the next generation of application, you'll want to find a way of getting this data into your application in a much more efficient way. So let me explain. So to build an application like a Rarible or an OpenSea or a Xerion or something like that, you'll need a really solid foundation beneath you. And the way to get cross-chain blockchain data and then do something with the raw data to make it meaningful before serving it to your users takes an entire back end. You're going to need a server, you're going to need a database, you're going to need to process all of the data that you get from the blockchain, and you're going to need to do that quickly. So for example, if we take a look at Xerion, Xerion lets you log in, connect to a wallet, get an address, and then it searches for all of the different assets that you hold. So I signed in this example with a MetaMask wallet, and the wallet doesn't have very many assets, but it lets you see all of the assets that it holds. You can see the current value of that. It does quite a bit of processing here. But how does it do that? How does it get the information? Does it get it all from MetaMask? Because MetaMask does inject a Web3 provider into the browser, doesn't it? But it doesn't get an array of all of my assets like this to be able to display it quickly. There's no function that MetaMask can use to get all of the tokens from my address. And you can't use Ethers or Web3 to do that quickly either, unless you literally ask all of the different tokens one by one. Ethereum, how many tokens does this wallet user have? BNB, how many does this user have? Polygon Matic, how many does this user have? And you'd have to do that through every single token contract. There are thousands of token contracts. So just to figure out the assets, you'd have to search 1,000 times and ask the same question. And then you'd have to check on the different blockchains as well, because maybe I'm interacted with the Binance Smart Chain or or Polygon or Avalanche. So very, very quickly you realize that there's a lot of calls to get all of that information that you'd need. So how does Ethereum do it? How does any application do that? But if you think about it, you'd need access directly to the blockchain to go and download all of the data from it. So why not just run your own node? Literally download all of the blockchain data from a node. The answer why not everybody does this is because it takes a long time. It's about a terabyte in size. You'll need to store that data somewhere. And then you're going to need a backend at some point to store the data, to process the data. You're going to need to be able to query the data, build an API from it probably. And that's going to take a whole team. You need a whole back-end team, and it takes a lot of time to build all the server clusters, find the right people, manage the right people. It's a lot of work. So maybe you could skip that step and just go directly to an RPC node provider, like an Infura or a Quick Node. They can give you an API to get direct access to the node. In actual fact, you could go to an API provider in general to get the data and skip the fact of interacting directly with a node. Moralis has an API that's incredibly good. Covalent, there are lots of other APIs that are out there, but still, you're just going to have access to a whole bunch of raw data. You can't query raw data very easily without having a backend to store it and process it. And who's going to design the architecture for the backend? Who's going to provision and manage it? Who's going to connect the backend to your front end so you can use the data that you've got? Plus, maybe the node provider or the API provider has limits on how much data that you can get from them. So there are a lot of considerations. But assuming you've taken care of all of that, let's assume you've built your backend, you've got your database, you've got all the data you need. Now you realize after a few days that your users have just swapped some assets on chain. And now all the data that you've got in your database is out of sync with the blockchain. So what do you do now? Do you just call the APIs again? Do you re-download all of the data again? Because that's going to happen all the time as assets change hands and move on chain. So now you're going to need to build out sockets and create real-time alerts when something happens on chain, which means you're going to need more servers. You're going to need more processing power. You're going to need more people, which means you're going to need to hire people to train them, which means you're going to need squad leaders, which means that, again, it's a lot of work. And then you need to decide how you're going to manage all of your user data and how you're going to allow your users to interact with your application. And then you realize you want to be on Polygon and Binance Smart Chain and Avalanche and cross-chain. So you've got to rebuild everything. And how do you build for mobile? How do you build for the different programming languages that you want to build in? That's quite a journey, which we see a lot of app developers taking. Everybody wants to come along and reinvent the wheel and spend months building solutions for themselves because that's the way that it worked in the Web 2.0 world. But once more, why don't you just step back and think, why can't I just log into my account, fire up a server, fire up a database, get an API automatically, get automatic syncing options, be able to write code server-side, be able to access real-time events and triggers and webhooks so when something happens on chain, the data is updated. Why doesn't this exist in the Web3 world? Because in Web 2, there's Firebase and there's AWS Lambda and there's Azure. Why can't I have a crypto Firebase? And then they realize that it exists. And that's why they come to Moralis. Because that is what Moralis does exactly. Moralis is the Web3 development platform that can give you all of the information that you need to be able to build your applications. So that solution exists already. And with Moralis, you'll get a one-click setup. You get your database, you get access to the blockchain data, you can use our SDK, you get Ethereum, Polygon, Binance Smart Chain, Avalanche, so it's cross-chain, cross-platform, and just firing a few other features, you will get user management, access to token balances, token transfers, transaction history, events. You get a Web3 API, you get an NFT API, live queries, webhooks. It powers literally thousands of dapps around the world. So if you head on over to moralis.io, you'll find more information. Total visits over the last 20 days are incredible. We're improving every month. We've added an extra 500,000 total visits in the last 28 days. And the goal for Moralis is to be able to enable you to handle the front end and fully focus on that and let Moralis handle the back end. We want to condense all of the difficulties of getting data from the blockchain and condense it down to just single lines of code and small snippets that you can store in your database and then process however you need to. We offer a complete backend solution for your project. As we've said, server, database, API, full integration with Ethers or Web3.js. Cross-chain, cross-platform, and all of that great stuff. If you haven't already built something with Moralis, then start today. Moralis.io. Head on over, log in, or sign up for a free account. Once you've signed in, you'll be able to spin up a server and start building. Because for any developer that's watching this video that starts using our server and SDK to streamline their project, they're going to realize that they'll be able to save 80% of their development time and cost. Whether that's building a proof of concept or a minimum viable product or a full production application, the Moralis platform can help accelerate your build time. Once you've set yourself up a server, you'll be able to access all of the different statistics in here. So if you need to upgrade your server, you can do that if you're hitting the limits of what's capable on the free plan. You can get access to all of your credentials. You can access it via the command line interface. Once you spin up a new server, you just choose the chains that you want to connect to. Inside of your database, you can store an almost unlimited amount of data. It's a MongoDB database. You can write cloud functions, which are basically server-side functions that take the processing away from your user's front end. And at any point, if you do get stuck, you're welcome to use our forum, which is manned 24 hours a day. Just paste your code in there, and one of the developers will be able to help you. So all in all, Ethers is great for basic interaction. You just have to be aware of some of the limitations I've already mentioned. You also won't be able to do things like get NFTs for a user or get NFT metadata. You can't get owners and you can't get token balances for all of the assets that a user has. To do that easily, you would need to use the Moralis SDK. If you use the Moralis SDK instead of the library directly, it will also ensure that your application will be cross-chain compliant. So if you needed to move the app and port it over to another blockchain, you won't have to spend a lot of time rebuilding huge amounts of your code, because once you built it for one blockchain on Moralis, the same code will be able to then work on other blockchains as well. Once you start using the SDK, you realize you don't really need to interact a huge amount with those low-level JavaScript libraries. The majority of the functionality that you need will be available within our SDK. At the beginning of the video, we said we would compare the differences between two popular JavaScript libraries, Web3.js and Ethers.js. We looked at how we can support both of those with Moralis, although Ethers is the default now. We looked at some of the limitations between the libraries, specifically how you really need a backend to be able to process all of the information you get from the blockchain before serving it to your users. And the pro tip that we had for you is that Moralis provides you with that backend solution that you can plug into your application, and it's cross-chain by default, where you get a server, a database, the SDK, and lots of other functionality to help improve your development and speed up the time it takes take your application to market. So thank you very much for your time today. I hope the content was useful. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel if it was, and we'd love to hear some feedback in the comments. And before you leave today, just go and check out our careers page as well, because if you're interested in starting your Web3 career, then there are many job opportunities that are available for you. So if you're interested in getting involved with one of the most exciting Web3 projects in this space, then we would really love to hear from you. Keep building, guys, and we will see you in the next video.